Listen to this amazing story of miraculous healing. Enjoy listening. The aroma of toasted sesame and aged cheddar hung thick and comforting in the air of the kneaded hearth, Mia's culinary sanctuary. At 71, her hands, though gnarled with the wisdom of decades, moved with the practiced grace of a conductor, coaxing a symphony from her ingredients. Her legendary sourdough, the heart of her small, bustling community kitchen, was more than just bread. It was a testament to precision, patience, and a touch of rebellious artistry. Each morning before dawn truly broke over the quaint town of Oak Haven, Mia was already there, the rhythmic thump of dough against wood her personal sunrise. This particular morning, the air crackled with anticipation. The annual Oak Haven Food Festival was just weeks away, and Mia, a perennial favorite, was perfecting her entry. A black garlic and fig sourdough, a bold departure from her usual rustic loaves. She hummed softly, a low, contented rumble as she scored the dough, her brow furrowed in concentration. The slight ache in her left shoulder, a familiar companion these past few months, was merely a dull throb, easily ignored amidst the focused energy of creation. "Just age," she'd scoff to Ilara, her grandniece, whenever the topic arose. "All these years of lifting flour sacks and kneading dough, something's bound to creak." Ilara, 28, and a nurse whose pragmatic nature often clashed with Mia's artistic fervor, was a constant, gentle worry in Mia's periphery. "Aunt Mia, you're overdoing it," she chided, her voice laced with an affection that Mia usually dismissed with a wave of a flour-dusted hand. Mia valued practicality, tangibility. Anything else felt like a distraction from the real work of life, which for her was creating edible beauty. Her connection to food was almost spiritual, a tangible expression of love and service. She found more meaning in the perfect rise of a loaf than in any abstract notion of well-being. Her son Julian was a different story. 45, an architect of sleek, towering structures, he embodied the emotionally reserved, high-powered world Mia had long since left behind. Their relationship was a carefully constructed bridge of infrequent, polite phone calls and even rarer visits. He'd admire her work, perhaps even offer a clinical compliment on the efficiency of her kitchen layout, but the deep, shared warmth Mia craved remained elusive. He was a man of blueprints and precise calculations, less so of the messy, tactile joy that defined his mother. Mia stretched, her back protesting slightly, but her eyes, sharp and intelligent, were already scanning her mental mise en place for the next day. The black garlic needed another day of fermentation, the figs a touch more maceration. Her mind, a finely tuned engine, raced through possibilities, tweaking, refining. There was immense pride in her craft, a quiet triumph in transforming simple ingredients into something extraordinary. The subtle undercurrent of weariness that had begun to seep into her days was a minor inconvenience, a whisper she easily drowned out with the passionate symphony of her kitchen. What mattered was the bread, the community, the rhythm of her life. Anything that threatened that rhythm was simply an obstacle to be baked through. The persistent ache in Mia's left shoulder, initially brushed off as a consequence of her demanding profession, began to escalate. It wasn't just a dull throb anymore. It was a deep, gnawing pain that made even the simplest task a challenge. Lifting a heavy pot of stew felt like hoisting a boulder, and the rhythmic kneading of dough, once a meditative dance, became an exercise in grim determination. Her strong, capable hands, once tireless, now trembled with fatigue. Ilara, ever observant, noticed the subtle shifts. Mia, who usually bounced through her days, now moved with a perceptible drag. Her customary morning hum had faded, replaced by grunts of effort. "Aunt Mia," Ilara began one afternoon, watching Mia wince as she reached for a bag of flour. "That shoulder of yours isn't getting better, is it?" Mia sighed, a puff of flour dust escaping her lips. "It's just a bit more stubborn than usual. Probably that tricky sourdough starter, demanding more from me." She tried to sound dismissive, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. The truth was, the pain was becoming harder to ignore, a constant, unwelcome guest in her body. The fatigue, too, was deepening, pulling at her like an invisible weight. She found herself needing naps, something unheard of for the indefatigable Mia. "Stubborn or not, it's affecting your work, Aunt Mia," Ilara pressed, her tone gentle but firm. And you look exhausted. You haven't been sleeping well, have you? She knelt, gently probing Mia's shoulder. Mia flinched. That's a new spot, Alara observed, her brow furrowed. You really need to see a doctor. Not just for a quick checkup, but a proper investigation. Mia bristled. Doctors, they'll just tell me to rest or give me some pills. I don't have time for resting, Alara. The festival is weeks away, and pills just mask things. Her stubbornness, a defining trait, rose to the surface. She prided herself on her self-sufficiency, her ability to handle anything life threw at her. Illness, to Mia, felt like a weakness, an admission of defeat. She hated the idea of being poked and prodded, of relinquishing control over her own body. But Alara, a nurse who had seen too many patients wait too long, was uncharacteristically persistent. Aunt Mia, please. For me, if not for yourself. Just one appointment. If they say it's nothing, fine. But if it's something, we need to know. Her voice was soft, persuasive, tinged with an anxiety Mia couldn't quite ignore. The genuine concern in Alara's eyes chipped away at Mia's defenses. Finally, with a put-upon sigh, Mia relented. Fine, one appointment, but don't expect me to enjoy it. The initial doctor visits yielded inconclusive results. The general practitioner attributed the pain to osteoarthritis, a common ailment for someone of Mia's age and active lifestyle. The fatigue was dismissed as just age and the demands of running a busy kitchen. Mia felt a perverse sense of vindication. See, I told you, she told Alara. But the pain persisted, deepening rather than lessening, and the fatigue became a constant companion. Then came the dry, persistent cough, a new and unsettling symptom that appeared out of nowhere. Alara, her nurse's intuition screaming, pushed for further investigation. It's not just arthritis, Aunt Mia. Something's not right. Her insistence, fueled by a growing sense of dread, finally led to a series of more urgent tests. X-rays, then an MRI, and finally a biopsy. The sterile white walls of the consultation room seemed to press in on Mia, suffocating her. Dr. Aris, a young oncologist with kind but weary eyes, spoke in a measured, dispassionate tone, yet his words landed like sledgehammers. Mia, the biopsy results have confirmed our suspicions. It's Ewing sarcoma. Mia stared, uncomprehending. Ewing sarcoma. The word sounded alien, detached from her vibrant, flower-dusted life. She knew sarcoma was cancer, but Ewing, it felt like a cruel, esoteric joke. It's a rare and aggressive form of cancer, particularly in adults, Dr. Aris continued, his gaze drifting to the large screen, displaying complex medical images. The tumor is quite large, located in your left scapula, and unfortunately, we found early signs of metastasis, small nodules visible on your lung scans. He gestured to faint, hazy spots on the image. The persistent cough you've been experiencing is likely related. Mia felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Metastasis, lungs. The words echoed, hollow and terrifying. She couldn't process them, couldn't reconcile them with the woman who needed dough with boundless energy just weeks ago. A feeling of profound betrayal by her own body washed over her. This couldn't be happening. Not to her. Beside her, Alara's carefully constructed composure shattered. A small, choked sob escaped her lips, and tears streamed silently down her face. She reached for Mia's hand, her grip surprisingly tight, a desperate anchor in the storm. Dr. Aris continued, detailing the grim prognosis, the challenging treatment plan, aggressive chemotherapy, radiation, possibly surgery. Each medical term was a blow, each statistic a further confirmation of the nightmare. He spoke of 5-year survival rates, of difficult battles, of the rarity of the disease in someone her age. Mia heard the words, but they seemed to bounce off a thick wall of numbness. Her mind was a blank, save for a single desperate thought. This can't be real. Later, when Julian was informed, his reaction was starkly different. He didn't break down, didn't offer comfort. Instead, his voice, when he called, was rigid, almost clinical. I've already started researching top-tier oncology centers. Memorial Sloan Kettering has an excellent sarcoma program. I'll make the calls, arrange everything. His efficiency was chilling, a barrier against the messy, terrifying reality of his mother's impending battle. There was no emotional overture, no, I'm sorry, Mom, only the cold, unyielding pursuit of practical solutions. Mia hung up, feeling a profound loneliness, a stark contrast to Ilara's tearful, desperate presence. The doctor's words replayed in Mia's mind. Aggressive, rare, metastasis. The life she had so meticulously crafted, so deeply loved, felt suddenly fragile, poised on the edge of an abyss. The vibrant world of the kneaded hearth, the tactile joy of creation, the rhythm of her days, it all seemed to recede, replaced by the terrifying, inescapable reality of a body that had turned against itself. The future, once a well-planned recipe, was now a terrifying blank page. The slight ache in her left shoulder, a familiar companion for the past few weeks, decided to make its presence undeniably known. Mia kneaded, her movements fluid and strong, but a sharp, hot throb shot through her scapula with each rotation of her arm. She paused, flexing her shoulder. "Just age," she muttered, dismissing it as she had countless times before. "Too much proofing, not enough resting." She rubbed the spot, a deep, persistent ache that felt less like muscle strain and more like a dull, insistent drilling. It had been there for a while now, an unwelcome guest that had progressed from a faint whisper to a noticeable presence. By the time Ilara, her 28-year-old grandniece and a nurse with an unsettling knack for observation, arrived later that morning with fresh herbs from the farmer's market, Mia was struggling to lift a 20-pound bag of flour onto the counter. Her movements were slower, her brow furrowed not just in concentration, but in discomfort. "Aunt Mia, let me get that," Ilara said, her voice gentle but firm as she easily hoisted the bag. "You're looking a bit pale, and you're favoring that shoulder." Mia waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. Just a touch of the old arthritis acting up. The damp weather, you know." She tried to sound breezy, but the effort made her wince internally. The constant fatigue, too, had become harder to ignore. It wasn't the satisfying exhaustion after a long day of baking. It was a bone-deep weariness that clung to her even after a full night's sleep. And the weight loss? She'd attributed it to the stress of the festival preparations. But her apron felt looser, and her rings spun on her fingers. Ilara's eyes, trained to spot subtle signs of distress, narrowed. "Arthritis doesn't usually make you drop a flour scoop like that, or wince every time you reach for the top shelf. You need to see a doctor, Aunt Mia." "A doctor for a little ache?" Mia scoffed, trying to inject her usual spirited defiance into her voice. "I'm a chef, Ilara, not a porcelain doll. My body's been through worse. Besides, the festival can wait," Ilara interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "Your health can't. I'll make you an appointment. Dr. Ramirez, he's good." Mia sighed, a sound of exasperation mixed with a grudging acknowledgement. Ilara had a way of wearing her down, a gentle but relentless persistence that Mia, for all her stubbornness, found herself unable to fully resist. The thought of sitting in a sterile waiting room, answering endless questions, filled her with a familiar impatience. Her world was the vibrant chaos of the kitchen, the warmth of the oven, the tangible joy of creation. Medical appointments felt like a surrender to weakness, a disruption of her carefully orchestrated life. The initial visits to Dr. Ramirez were, as Mia predicted, inconclusive. He ran some blood tests, took x-rays of her shoulder. "Looks like some degenerative changes, Mia, consistent with your age and activity level," he'd said, reviewing the scans. "Could be rotator cuff or just osteo. Try some anti-inflammatories. Rest it if you can." Rested? The idea was laughable. Mia was preparing for the biggest culinary event of the year, but the pain didn't subside. It deepened, becoming a constant, dull throb that radiated down her arm, and sometimes, disconcertingly, felt like it was pressing on her ribs. The fatigue escalated, turning her once boundless energy into a precious, finite resource. One afternoon, while shaping loaves, a sudden, sharp pain seized her left shoulder, so intense it made her drop the dough onto the pristine countertop. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled. Ilara, who came by every day now, saw the grimace that Mia couldn't quite hide. "That's it," Ilara declared, her face pale. "We're getting a second opinion, and an MRI. Something isn't right, Aunt Mia." Mia, too exhausted to argue, simply nodded. The fear a cold, unwelcome guest had begun to truly settle in. It wasn't the fleeting apprehension of a missed recipe or a burnt crust. It was a profound, chilling dread that whispered of something far more serious. The MRI results came back quickly, too quickly. Mia sat in Dr. Ramirez's office, the sterile white walls mirroring the sudden emptiness in her stomach. Ilara sat beside her, clutching her hand, her own face etched with a fear she tried to hide. Dr. Ramirez, usually so jovial, looked grim. He spoke, his voice low and measured, of anomalies, of masses, of suspicious findings. He used words like urgent biopsy and oncologist. Mia felt a disconnect, as if he were talking about someone else entirely. Her body, her strong, reliable body, couldn't possibly be harboring such foreign, menacing things. The biopsy was a blur of needles and sterile drapes. Then came the phone call, the one that shattered her world into a million irreparable pieces. Mia, Dr. Ramirez's voice, strangely compassionate yet firm, came through the receiver. The results are back. It's Ewing sarcoma, a large, aggressive tumor in your left scapula. Mia's breath hitched. Ewing what? Sarcoma? The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She remembered him explaining it. The rarity, the aggressiveness, the grim prognosis. And Mia, he continued, his voice softening, we've also found early signs of metastasis, small nodules in your lungs. Metastasis, lungs. The dry, persistent cough she'd been attributing to winter allergies suddenly took on a terrifying new meaning. Mia felt a strange, detached numbness. Her hand, still holding the phone, felt impossibly heavy. She heard Ilara's sharp gasp from across the room, saw her grandniece's face crumple, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ilara rushed to her, pulling her into a tight embrace, sobbing openly. Mia, however, couldn't cry. She felt nothing but a profound, chilling disbelief. This couldn't be happening, not to her. She was Mia, the chef, the baker, the strong, independent woman who kneaded life with her bare hands. Death was for other people, for worn-out bodies, not for her vibrant, purposeful existence. When Julian, her son, called back hours later, Mia had left a terse voicemail, unable to speak the words aloud. His reaction was exactly as she'd predicted. Clinical, distant. I've already pulled up a list of the top oncology centers, Mother, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, as if discussing a building project. Memorial Sloan Kettering, MD Anderson. I'll make calls. We'll get you the best. This is a battle plan now. There was no, are you okay, Mom? No, I'm so sorry. Just a cold, efficient assessment of the situation. Mia hung up, a fresh wave of despair washing over her, not for the diagnosis itself, but for the stark, desolate chasm that lay between her and her son. Ilara, still tear-streaked, looked at her aunt with a mixture of raw grief and desperate concern. Mia met her gaze, a profound fear finally rising to the surface, a fear she could no longer deny, no longer dismiss as just age. Her world, once defined by the comforting rhythm of dough and the warmth of her oven, had suddenly become a terrifying, unknown landscape. The scent of toasted sesame and aged cheddar, once her sanctuary, now felt like a cruel irony, a ghost of the life she was about to lose. Aunt Mia, let me get that, Ilara said, her voice gentle but firm as she stepped in, easily hoisting the bag of flour Mia was wrestling with. She had been observing Mia for weeks, noticing the subtle shifts, the way Mia often rubbed her shoulder when she thought no one was looking, the slight tremor in her hands when reaching for a high shelf, the increasing pallor under her usually rosy cheeks. Mia, ever the stoic, would brush off any concern with a wave of her hand and a dismissive, just a touch of rheumatism, dear, comes with the territory of a life well needed. But the territory was clearly expanding. Mia's boundless energy, once a force of nature, was waning. She was leaving the kitchen earlier, her meticulously planned schedule often disrupted by unscheduled rests. One evening, Ilara found Mia dozing in her armchair, something unheard of. Mia had always scoffed at naps, declaring them an indulgence for the idle. The dry, persistent cough that had started a few days ago, barely noticeable at first, was now a regular punctuation mark in their conversations. Ilara finally cornered Mia after a particularly grueling morning, where Mia had almost dropped a tray of freshly baked baguettes. "Aunt Mia, this isn't just rheumatism. You're exhausted, you're losing weight, and that cough. You need to see Dr. Chen, now." Mia bristled. "Nonsense, Ilara. I'm just preparing for the festival. It takes a lot out of you, you know. And I haven't lost weight, I've just streamlined." She tried for a dismissive laugh, but it hitched in her throat, ending in a hacking cough that left her breathless. Ilara's expression hardened. "Streamlining doesn't explain why you're struggling to lift a 2-pound loaf of bread, Aunt Mia, and it certainly doesn't explain that cough. My appointment this afternoon. I've already called Dr. Chen's office." Mia sighed, a sound of profound, weary resignation. She knew deep down that Ilara was right. The pain in her shoulder was no longer just an ache. It was a constant, gnawing presence, a dull roar beneath the surface of her daily life, flaring into a sharp, blinding stab with certain movements. It was stealing her sleep, her appetite, and worst of all, her joy in the very act of creation. The thought of dough, once a comfort, now seemed an insurmountable obstacle. She hated feeling vulnerable, hated the idea of a doctor poking and prodding. But Ilara's gaze was unwavering, filled with a love and concern Mia couldn't ignore. The initial visit to Dr. Chen was, as expected, frustrating. He attributed her symptoms to age-related degeneration, possibly osteoarthritis, and prescribed anti-inflammatories, suggesting physical therapy. Mia left feeling validated in her initial dismissal, but the pain persisted, stubbornly refusing to yield to medication. The fatigue deepened, wrapping her in a leaden cloak. She found herself canceling more baking classes, citing unforeseen equipment issues. Her meticulous accounting books, usually a source of quiet satisfaction, lay untouched. Ilara wasn't satisfied. Being a nurse, she had seen enough unexplained symptoms to know when to push. "Dr. Chen is good, but sometimes a fresh pair of eyes is needed," she insisted, gently but firmly guiding Mia to a specialist, an orthopedist renowned for sports injuries. This doctor, a younger, more thorough man, listened intently to Mia's description of the deep, persistent ache, the increasing fatigue, the unexplained weight loss that had now become undeniable, and the dry cough. He ordered an MRI, a bone scan, and a battery of blood tests. The day Mia received the call to come in for the results, a chill wind seemed to sweep through the kneaded hearth, even though the sun was shining. Ilara insisted on accompanying her. The orthopedist's office was quiet, the air thick with unspoken apprehension. Dr. Evans, his face grave, sat them down. "Mia," he began, his voice softer than before. "The scans. They show something concerning. There's a large mass in your left scapula. We've done a biopsy, and the results, they've come back as Ewing sarcoma." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, waited with a terrifying finality. Mia stared at him, uncomprehending. Ewing what? Sarcoma. The words felt foreign, alien, like a language she didn't speak. Her mind, usually so sharp and analytical, refused to process. It was as if her brain had thrown up a protective shield, deflecting the terrifying truth. All she heard was a buzzing in her ears, a distant, muffled roar. This couldn't be right. This happened to other people, not to Mia, the woman who needed life into being, who defined herself by her strength and her precision. Ilara gasped, a choked, guttural sound, and then she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Mia felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching a scene unfold on a stage, observing Ilara's distress from a great distance. Dr. Evans continued, his voice gentle but firm, cutting through Mia's fog. "It's an aggressive form of cancer, Mia, and the scans also show small nodules in your lungs, which indicates early metastasis." He explained the rarity of Ewing sarcoma in adults, its aggressive nature, the challenging treatment protocol, chemotherapy, radiation, possibly surgery, a long, arduous journey. He spoke of prognosis, of percentages, of the fight ahead. But Mia heard none of it. Her world had shrunk to a pinpoint of disbelief, a profound, sickening sense of betrayal by her own body. "No," Mia finally managed to whisper, her voice thin, reedy, completely unlike her own. No, that's not right. There must be a mistake. I'm healthy. I bake. I work. I'm Mia. She looked from Dr. Evans' somber face to Alara's broken form, a rising tide of ice-cold fear beginning to seep into her detached calm. Alara eventually composed herself enough to ask the practical questions, her nurse's training kicking in even through her tears. What are the next steps? What's the treatment plan? Where do we go from here? Mia, still numb, could only nod mutely, the words cancer, aggressive, metastasis, echoing in the hollow chamber of her shock. She felt as if she had been plunged into an icy black ocean, the current threatening to drag her under. This wasn't just an ache, it was a death sentence. Later that evening, after Alara had somehow guided Mia home, Mia's phone rang. It was Julian, her son, whom Alara had called with the devastating news. Mia braced herself for the wave of concern, the emotional outpouring she usually found so uncomfortable, but anticipated nonetheless. "Mother!" Julian's voice was crisp, efficient, devoid of any discernible emotion. Alara called, "This cancer, I've already pulled some strings. Dr. Anya Sharma at the National Oncology Institute is the best for this. I've scheduled a preliminary consultation for next Tuesday. They have a state-of-the-art facility, cutting-edge therapies. We'll get you the best. Don't worry about the logistics. I'll handle everything." Mia listened, a strange, hollow ache replacing the initial shock. He spoke of logistics, of facilities, of therapies. Not once did he ask how she felt, or offer a word of comfort or empathy. It was as if she were a broken machine, and he, the meticulous architect, was already drawing up plans for her repair. The stark contrast between Alara's raw, unfiltered grief and Julian's cold, detached efficiency highlighted the chasm that had always existed between Mia and her son. Even in the face of her potential demise, Julian remained resolutely, clinically, himself. Mia hung up the phone, the clinical terms still ringing in her ears, feeling utterly, terrifyingly alone. The black garlic and fig sourdough, her masterpiece for the festival, sat on the counter, unbaked, its promise of creation a cruel mockery of the destruction now unfolding within her. The sterile white walls of the oncology ward at St. Jude's Medical Center felt like a prison cell, a stark contrast to the warm, flower-dusted embrace of the needed hearth. Mia, draped in a flimsy hospital gown, watched the clear liquid drip from the IV bag into her arm. Each drop a tiny invasion, a surrender she deeply resented. This was her first round of aggressive chemotherapy, and the initial flush of nausea was already bubbling in her stomach, a bitter taste rising in her throat. "It's going to be tough, Mia," Dr. Chen had warned, his voice kind but firm. "Ewing sarcoma, especially at your age, requires an aggressive approach. You'll feel quite ill. Fatigue, nausea, hair loss. It's all part of the process." Mia had nodded, her jaw tight. She understood processes. She understood chemistry. But the concept of her own body being poisoned to heal felt fundamentally wrong, a violation of the meticulous order she had always imposed on her life. The first few days were a blur of escalating misery. The nausea became a constant companion, a churning sea inside her. Food, her lifelong passion and profession, became an enemy. The thought of butter, of yeast, of the rich aroma of baking bread, now sent waves of revulsion through her. Her mouth developed painful sores, making even sips of water an ordeal. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by vivid, disorienting dreams. Alara was a constant, quiet presence. She brought Mia cool cloths for her forehead, helped her sip ginger ale, and rubbed her aching feet. She tried to coax Mia into eating bland crackers, her brow furrowed with worry. "Just a little, Aunt Mia. You need your strength." "Strength?" Mia rasped, her voice thin and reedy, a shadow of its usual robust tone. "What strength is left when they're pumping poison into you? This isn't strength, Alara. This is humiliation." Alara, ever practical, avoided direct confrontation. But her attempts to introduce anything beyond the purely medical were met with sharp rebuffs. "Aunt Mia, maybe we could try some gentle meditation. It might help with the nausea. Calm your mind." "My mind is perfectly calm." Mia snapped, turning her head away. "It's my stomach that's staging a revolution. And don't talk to me about calming my mind. My mind needs solutions, not airy-fairy nonsense." "What about prayer?" Ilara ventured one afternoon, holding a small, smooth worry stone. "Even just a quiet moment of reflection?" Mia snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "Prayer, Ilara? For what? To ask for a miracle?" "My miracle is in the hands of Dr. Chen and his chemicals. Faith is for those who can't handle reality. I'm a realist, Ilara. Always have been." She closed her eyes, wishing Ilara would simply leave her to her misery and peace. The idea of surrendering to some unseen force, of admitting weakness, was anathema to her. It felt like an abdication of responsibility, a betrayal of the self-reliance she had cultivated over 7 decades. Julian visited as promised, but his presence was as sterile as the hospital room. He brought glossy pamphlets from highly rated cancer centers across the country, discussed second opinions, and rattled off statistics on survival rates. He spoke to Dr. Chen at length, asking precise clinical questions about protocols and prognoses. He arranged for a private nurse, a stern woman named Nurse Davis, to oversee Mia's care. But he never held her hand, never offered a comforting word, never met her eye with anything but a distant, analytical gaze. "The treatment plan is rigorous, Aunt Mia," he said, adjusting his expensive tie. "But Dr. Chen assures me you're in the best hands." "The best hands are currently making me vomit every hour," Mia muttered, too tired to even be truly angry. Julian simply nodded, seemingly unfazed by her sarcasm. He was efficient, thorough, and utterly devoid of warmth. His visits felt less like a son checking on his ailing mother and more like a CEO overseeing a critical, high-stakes project. As the weeks dragged on, Mia's body transformed. Her once lustrous silver hair began to shed, first in clumps on her pillow, then in alarming handfuls in the shower. Soon her scalp was bare, a stark mirror to her vulnerability. Her skin took on a sallow hue, her eyes sunken. She lost weight rapidly, her once robust frame now fragile and skeletal. The persistent ache in her left shoulder, though dulled by painkillers, remained a constant, nagging presence, a sinister reminder of the enemy within. She spent most of her days drifting in and out of a haze of fatigue and discomfort. The outside world, the bustling rhythm of the kneaded hearth, the laughter of her customers, the familiar comfort of her kitchen, all felt impossibly distant, like memories from another lifetime. Her identity, so inextricably linked to her strength, her independence, her craft, was slowly being eroded, leaving behind a raw, aching emptiness. She was no longer Mia, the formidable chef, the artisan. She was merely a patient, a body under siege, utterly dependent and utterly, miserably alone in her struggle. The bitter taste of treatment was not just in her mouth, it was in her soul. The fluorescent hum of the hospital room was a constant, irritating drone, a metallic symphony of despair. Mia lay in the narrow bed, a ghost of her former self. The aggressive chemotherapy, meant to be her salvation, felt more like a slow, agonizing dissolution. Her once tousled silver hair, a testament to years spent leaning over hot ovens, was now a sparse, fragile halo, threatening to abandon her entirely with every turn of her head. The nausea was a relentless tide, ebbing only to crash back with renewed vengeance, leaving her too weak to lift her head, too repulsed by the thought of food to even contemplate a sip of water. The vibrant culinary world she had meticulously built had shrunk to the 4 sterile walls of room 312, and the only aroma she could detect was the cloying scent of antiseptic. Dr. Chen had entered earlier, his face a carefully neutral mask that Mia had learned to interpret as bad news. "Mia, we just got the results from the latest scans," he began, his voice softer than usual. "While we've seen some initial cellular response, the tumor in your scapula, it hasn't shrunk as much as we'd hoped, and the lung nodules, they appear to be slightly larger. It seems this particular sarcoma is proving more resistant to the current regimen than we anticipated." Mia closed her eyes, a wave of profound, bone-deep weariness washing over her. She didn't need scans to tell her. The pain, a dull, relentless throb in her left shoulder, had sharpened into a hot, searing agony that pulsed with every beat of her heart. It was no longer just an ache. It was a hungry beast, devouring her from the inside out. Even the painkillers, once a welcome reprieve, now offered only fleeting moments of numb oblivion before the beast reasserted its claim. She remembered the doctor's initial words. Ewing sarcoma, especially at your age, requires an aggressive approach. Now it seemed the aggression was all on the cancer side. The fix-it mindset she had clung to, the belief that science and her own formidable will could conquer anything, was crumbling. The thought of food, once the source of her greatest joy and creativity, now turned her stomach. Ilara would bring small, bland portions, homemade broths, or soft custards, but Mia would turn her head away, the very scent curdling her insides. I can't, Ilara. Just take it away, she'd croak, her voice a reedy whisper, a far cry from the booming, confident tones that once commanded her kitchen. Ilara, bless her persistent heart, still tried. She'd sit by Mia's bedside, quietly reading from a book of poetry, or sometimes, to Mia's irritation, a spiritual text. There's a meditation group that meets in the chapel, Aunt Mia. It's quite calming. Or sometimes just listening to gentle music can help, or even a guided visualization. Mia would cut her off with a sharp, dismissive wave of her hand. Ilara, please, I just want quiet. No hocus pocus, no crystal waving, just quiet. Her grandniece would sigh, a sound laden with unspoken worry, but she would comply, retreating to the worn armchair in the corner of the room, her presence a silent, aching vigil. Ilara's face was etched with exhaustion, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights spent poring over medical journals or simply fretting. Mia knew she was hurting Ilara, pushing her away, but she couldn't help it. The pain, both physical and existential, was too overwhelming. There was no space for comfort, no room for anything but the crushing weight of her own despair. Julian, true to form, made his appearances brief, almost transactional. He had arranged for a private nurse to supplement the hospital staff, ensuring Mia had round-the-clock care. He had consulted with a team of oncologists at a renowned research hospital, presenting their findings with the precision of a master architect detailing blueprints. They suggest a second-line chemotherapy, Mia, perhaps with a different cocktail of drugs. Clinical trials are also an option, though the side effects can be even more severe. He spoke of options, of strategies, of next steps, but his eyes, usually sharp and assessing, held a distant, almost clinical detachment. He never touched her, never offered a word of comfort beyond the practical. It was as if he were discussing a complicated project, not his dying mother. Mia felt a profound sense of abandonment, even as they sat by her side. They were there physically, but the chasm between her agony and their well-meaning, yet ultimately insufficient, attempts to help felt vast and unbridgeable. She had always prided herself on her independence, her self-sufficiency. Now she was utterly dependent, a prisoner in her own failing body. The thought of the kneaded hearth, the bustling kitchen, the scent of yeast and warm bread was a torment. It stood empty now, she knew, the ovens cold, the counters clear. A symbol of her lost life, a monument to the vibrant future that had been snatched away. She had stopped asking about it, just as she had stopped asking for updates on her condition. What was the point? The answers were always the same. Pain, decline, dwindling hope. Her world had shrunk, not just to the room, but to the next breath, the next wave of nausea, the next searing throb in her shoulder. Hope, once a sturdy oak, had withered to a brittle twig, and now even that was gone. There was only the crushing weight of doubt, the certainty of defeat. She was Mia, the chef, the independent spirit, the woman who kneaded life into being. But now she was nothing but a fragile shell, waiting for the inevitable crack. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the IV pump and the ragged sound of her own labored breathing. The fluorescent hum of the hospital room was a constant, irritating drone, a metallic symphony of despair. Mia lay in the narrow bed, a ghost of her former self. The aggressive chemotherapy, meant to be her salvation, felt more like a slow, agonizing dissolution. Her once tousled silver hair, a testament to years spent leaning over hot ovens, was now a sparse, fragile halo, threatening to abandon her entirely with every turn of her head. The nausea was a relentless tide, ebbing only to crash back with renewed vengeance, leaving her too weak to lift her head, too repulsed by the thought of food to even contemplate a sip of water. The vibrant culinary world she had meticulously built had shrunk to the four sterile walls of room 312, and the only aroma she could detect was the cloying scent of antiseptic. Dr. Chen had entered earlier, his face a carefully neutral mask that Mia had learned to interpret as bad news. "Mia, we just got the results from the latest scans," he began, his voice laced with an uncharacteristic weariness. "The tumor, it shows limited response to the current regimen, and the lung nodules, they appear slightly larger." He paused, allowing the words to sink in. "We're seeing increased metabolic activity. The pain, how is it?" Mia didn't answer. She couldn't. The pain in her left scapula had become a constant, searing flame, radiating through her arm, making even the slightest shift in position a monumental effort. It was a deep, bone-gnawing ache that no amount of pain medication seemed to fully subdue. Every breath felt like a shallow, inadequate gasp, as if her lungs, too, were being slowly suffocated from within. The dry, persistent cough that had started weeks ago now racked her body, each spasm a fresh assault on her already ravaged frame. She was wasting away, her once strong chef's hands now skeletal, her fingers trembling uncontrollably. The thought of food, once her greatest joy, now triggered a violent wave of nausea. She had lost nearly 20 pounds. Ilara, ever present, sat by her bedside, her face etched with worry. She tried to tempt Mia with small sips of broth, with ice chips, with carefully peeled grapes. Mia turned her head away, her stomach churning at the mere sight. "Leave it, Ilara," she rasped, her voice thin and reedy. "Just leave it." Ilara's attempts to introduce comfort, to play soft music, to read from a book of meditations, were met with curt, dismissive grunts. Mia couldn't tolerate the softness, the unspoken pity. She only wanted the pain to stop, the relentless, crushing weight of despair that settled over her like a shroud. Julian visited, his suits impeccably tailored, his briefcase always by his side. He spoke in hushed tones with Dr. Chen about alternative clinical trials, about second opinions, about transferring her to a facility in Boston. His voice, though concerned, still carried that detached, almost academic tone that made Mia want to scream. He was trying to fix it, to apply logic and resources to an illogical, uncontrollable horror. He never offered a hand, never smoothed her brow, never simply sat in silence. He was a whirlwind of pragmatic solutions, none of which touched the raw, weeping wound of her spirit. The needed hearth, her beloved bakery, stood empty. Ilara had tried to keep it going for a while, but Mia had insisted she focus on her. Now the storefront was dark, the aroma of yeast and warm bread replaced by the sterile smell of disinfectant that clung to Mia's skin. It was a tangible symbol of everything she had lost, everything that was being stripped away, her identity, her purpose, her very essence. One afternoon, as the setting sun cast long, melancholic shadows across the hospital room, a figure appeared in the doorway. She was a woman of about 75 with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and a gentle smile. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore a plain, practical dress. Mia stared, disoriented by the pain and the heavy fog of medication. "Mia, is that really you, dear?" the woman asked, her voice soft, yet resonating with an unexpected strength. Mia squinted. "Do I know you?" The woman chuckled, a warm, comforting sound. "It's Agnes, Mia. Sister Agnes, from St. Michael's Orphanage. We shared a bunk, remember? You always snuck extra bread from the kitchen after Sister Mary went to bed." Mia's mind struggled to connect the dots. Agnes, Sister Agnes, her childhood friend. She hadn't seen Agnes in decades, 50 years at least. Agnes had joined a convent, a lifestyle Mia, with her fierce independence and love for the tangible world, could never comprehend. "Agnes, what are you doing here?" Mia managed, her voice barely a whisper. Agnes stepped further into the room, pulling up a chair with a quiet scrape. I heard through the community grapevine, dear. Our little town is small. When I heard about Mia from the Kneaded Hearth, I knew it had to be you. I'm living at the monastery just down the road now." She reached out, and for a terrifying moment, Mia thought she would touch her. Instead, Agnes simply rested her hands, palms up in her lap. "How are you truly, Mia?" Mia snorted, a bitter, humorless sound. "How do you think? I'm dying, Agnes. Slowly and painfully." Agnes's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "I see you're in great pain, dear. Physical, yes, but also a different kind of pain." Mia scoffed. "Oh, here we go. The spiritual council." She had already rebuffed Alara's gentle suggestions. She certainly didn't need it from a nun she hadn't seen since Eisenhower was president. "I don't want to hear about God, Agnes, or angels or grace. I want to be able to eat. I want the pain in my shoulder to stop feeling like a hot poker. I want to bake again. And none of your prayers are going to do that." "Perhaps not in the way you expect," Agnes replied, her voice still calm, unruffled by Mia's acerbity. "Sometimes the greatest graces come when we've exhausted all our own strength, when we simply surrender." "Surrender?" Mia spat the word like a curse. "I've been surrendering for weeks. To the chemo, to the pain, to the doctors telling me I'm running out of options." Agnes simply smiled, a sad, knowing smile. She didn't press. She just sat there, a quiet, gentle presence amidst the sterile chaos, a stark contrast to Julian's urgent phone calls and Alara's tearful ministrations. She spoke of simple things, of the monastery garden, of the quiet rhythm of prayer, of finding beauty in the smallest moments. Mia, too exhausted to argue, simply let the words wash over her. Dr. Chen returned later, his face grimmer than ever. He spoke of palliative care, of managing symptoms, of making Mia comfortable. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. This was it, the end. That night, the pain intensified, a searing, all-consuming fire. Mia whimpered, clutching the sheets, tears finally streaming down her face, not from pain, but from the utter, crushing defeat. Alara, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, gently stroked Mia's forehead. "Mia," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with unshed tears. Please, just try. Anything. A prayer. Not for healing, if you don't want to, but just a prayer of surrender. Just to get rid of the pain. Please, Mia. For me. Just try." Mia stared at the ceiling, her breath catching in her throat with each ragged cough. She was at her absolute lowest, stripped bare of pride, of strength, of hope. There was truly nothing left to lose. The idea of prayer, of anything spiritual, still felt alien, a weakness. But Alara's voice, so filled with desperate love, broke through the hard shell Mia had built around herself. A prayer for the pain to stop, not for a miracle, just for the pain to stop. A concession born of utter, exhausted defeat, not faith. "Fine," Mia rasped, the word a bitter, barely audible sigh. "Fine. What do you want me to say?" She closed her eyes, waiting for the words of submission, of humble supplication. But what would come out of her mouth, she knew, would be something entirely different. A final, desperate, defiant plea. The fluorescent hum of the hospital room was a constant, irritating drone, a metallic symphony of despair. Mia lay in the narrow bed, a ghost of her former self. The aggressive chemotherapy, meant to be her salvation, felt more like a slow, agonizing dissolution. Her once tousled silver hair, a testament to years spent leaning over hot ovens, was now a sparse, fragile halo, threatening to abandon her entirely with every turn of her head. The nausea was a relentless tide, ebbing only to crash back with renewed vengeance, leaving her too weak to lift her head, too repulsed by the thought of food to even contemplate a sip of water. The vibrant culinary world she had meticulously built had shrunk to the four sterile walls of room 312, and the only aroma she could detect was the cloying scent of antiseptic. Dr. Chen had entered earlier, his face a carefully neutral mask that Mia had learned to interpret as bad news. "Mia, we just got the results from the latest scans," he began, his voice a practiced monotone. and it appears the tumor in your scapula has shown limited response to the last cycle. The lung nodules, they're slightly larger. We're discussing a new regimen, but at this stage, we also need to talk about palliative care options. The words had hit her like physical blows, each one chipping away at the last vestiges of her hope. Ilara, present for the consultation, had clutched Mia's hand, her own face a canvas of raw grief. Even Julian, usually so composed, had paled, his jaw clenched so tight Mia thought she heard his teeth grind. Then Sister Agnes had arrived, an unexpected, almost ethereal presence in the sterile environment. Mia had resented her calm, her quiet faith, her gentle suggestions of prayer and surrender. Mia, sometimes the greatest strength lies in letting go, Agnes had murmured, her hand cool on Mia's feverish brow. Give me the strength to do what I can, and the wisdom to know what I cannot. The words had drifted through Mia's pain-addled mind, like faint wisps of smoke, too abstract, too spiritual for her practical, grounded soul. But now the words echoed, not as a gentle suggestion, but as a desperate, guttural cry from the depths of her being. The pain in her left shoulder was a white-hot spear, twisting deeper with every shallow breath. The dry, persistent cough had worsened, a constant, ragged tearing in her chest. She was skeletal, weak, her body a battlefield scarred by a war she was losing. Julian had left to make a call, probably to some new specialist, some new cutting-edge trial he'd found online. Ilara had stepped out, her voice muffled in the hallway as she spoke to a nurse, likely about another dose of pain medication. Mia was alone, utterly, terribly alone, in the quiet, agonizing hum of her dying. Give me the strength to do what I can. Agnes's words again. But what could she do? Her hands, once capable of transforming flour and water into miracles, trembled uncontrollably. Her mind, once sharp and decisive, drifted in a fog of pain and medication. Her body was failing. Everything was failing. A flicker, a memory, not of a prayer, but of a purpose. The aroma of warm yeast, the feel of smooth, elastic dough under her hands. The kneaded hearth, it stood empty, a monument to her lost life. The annual town food festival was just a few weeks away, a date she had once anticipated with such fierce joy. She had planned to bake her legendary sunshine loaf, a sourdough embedded with sun-dried tomatoes and herbs, a burst of warmth and flavor. She couldn't eat. The thought of food was repulsive. She couldn't even sit up without Ilara's help. But the kitchen, the familiar, comforting space, the rhythm of kneading, the heat of the oven, the glorious scent of baking bread. It wasn't for her, no. It couldn't be. But what if it was for them? For the community who had loved her bread, for Ilara who had stood by her, for even Julian, who despite his emotional distance, had moved mountains for her medical care. A bizarre, almost insane idea took root in the desolate landscape of her mind. A single loaf, one last loaf, not for her own sustenance, but as an offering, a prayer of creation, the only prayer her hands knew how to articulate. Not a plea for healing, but a desperate, active surrender, a channeling of every last ounce of her being, her spirit, her fading artistry, into one final act of giving. The pain flared, a cruel reminder of her limitations. Her chest tightened, but the thought, once conceived, burned with a strange, fierce clarity. It was the only thing she could do, the only thing that felt like her in this ravaged body. When Ilara returned, Mia's eyes, though still sunken, held a glint of something new. Not hope, not defiance, but a resolute, almost terrifying determination. Ilara, Mia rasped, her voice thin. I need to go home. I need to bake. Ilara's jaw dropped. Mia, you can barely stand. The doctor said. I know what the doctor said, Mia interrupted, her voice gaining a surprising strength. But I need to do this. One last loaf. For the festival. For the hearth. For me. Her gaze was unwavering. Ilara looked at her aunt, then at the IV pole, then back at Mia's emaciated face. This wasn't a plea for a miracle cure. This was a plea for a final purpose, a last act of self. With a sigh, knowing the futility of arguing with Mia, when her mind was made up, Alara nodded slowly. "Let me talk to Dr. Chen. It'll have to be a short visit, and you'll need nurses there. And Julian will have a fit." Julian did, in fact, have a fit. He argued with Alara, with the nurses, with Dr. Chen. "This is reckless. She's too weak. She needs to be here, under constant supervision." But Mia, surprisingly, had found her voice. "Julian," she said, her voice weak but firm, "I am dying here slowly. Let me die doing something I know, something that is mine. Or let me try to live, truly live, for one last hour." Dr. Chen, perhaps recognizing the psychological need, or perhaps simply acknowledging the limited medical options, reluctantly agreed to a supervised short-term discharge. A medical transport was arranged. The moment Mia was wheeled into her familiar kitchen, a faint tremor ran through her. The scent of her own space, of flour and spices, not antiseptic, brought a tear to her eye. The large, well-worn wooden table, where countless loaves had been shaped, seemed to hum with silent invitation. Alara had already laid out the ingredients: flour, water, her ancient sourdough starter, salt. Julian, still stiff with anxiety, stood by the doorway, observing. He watched as Mia, with immense effort, pushed herself from the wheelchair, leaning heavily on the counter. He saw her frail hands reach for the heavy bag of flour, falter, and then, with a surge of almost superhuman will, lift it and pour it into the large mixing bowl. He saw the grimace of pain as she attempted to mix the dough, her left arm almost useless. Without a word, something shifted in Julian. He moved forward, hesitantly at first, then more purposefully. "Here," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Let me help with the kneading. Show me." Mia looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "It's about the feel, Julian," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "The tension, the stretch. It's like sculpting, but with life." And for the first time in years, Julian, the architect of cold steel and sharp angles, followed his mother's instructions, his large, capable hands tentatively mimicking her movements, kneading the dough with a surprising tenderness. The process was agonizingly slow. Every movement was a battle against pain and exhaustion. Mia directed, her voice often barely a whisper, but her eyes held a fierce, unyielding light. She explained the folds, the rests, the way the dough should feel, like a baby's bottom. Julian worked beside her, then Alara joined in, their hands a clumsy but loving extension of Mia's own failing strength. The kitchen, usually a solo performance, became a silent, collaborative prayer. The aroma, when the bread finally went into the oven, was intoxicating. It filled the kitchen, then seeped into the hallway, a warm, yeasty embrace that cut through the sterile tang of the hospital. It was the scent of life, of creation, of something profoundly, stubbornly beautiful. Mia, slumped in her wheelchair, watching the golden crust form through the oven door, felt a surprising calm settle over her. The pain was still there, a constant companion, but it felt distant, muted by the profound satisfaction of this final, desperate act. This was her prayer. This was her surrender. This was everything she had left to give. The day after the surrender loaf had been carefully whisked away, a hush fell over Mia's hospital room, thicker and more oppressive than the usual sterile quiet. The fleeting flicker of purpose, the strange calm that had settled over her during the baking, had vanished, replaced by a storm of pain that ripped through her body, a cruel reminder of the disease's relentless grip. Her breath, already shallow, became ragged, each inhalation a monumental effort, punctuated by a dry, hacking cough that rattled her frail frame. The insidious tendrils of the cancer, once mere whispers on the scans, now tightened their hold on her lungs, making every gasp a battle for air. Dr. Chen, his face etched with a grim defeat, had stopped by early, his words soft, almost a murmur. "Mia, we're doing everything we can for comfort. The latest imaging, the lung involvement has significantly progressed. We're moving towards palliative care, ensuring you're as pain-free as possible." His gaze, usually direct and clinical, now held a deep sadness, a silent acknowledgement of a fight lost. He spoke of increasing morphine, of managing symptoms, of the inevitable. Mia drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of conversation reaching her through the haze of pain and medication. She heard Ilara's choked sobs, Julian's uncharacteristic silence, heavy and suffocating. Her grandniece, usually a whirlwind of efficient care, now sat by her bedside, her hand clutched in Mia's, a constant, comforting weight. Occasionally, Ilara would lean in, her voice raspy, whispering prayers Mia couldn't quite decipher, words of comfort, words of farewell. Julian, stiff and unyielding even in his grief, had pulled up a chair on the other side of the bed, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the hospital walls. Yet Mia knew he was there, a silent vigil, his presence a stark testament to the depth of his unspoken love and despair. The world outside the room faded into insignificance. Mia was a ship tossed on a turbulent sea, clinging precariously to the last threads of her consciousness. The pain was a living entity, clawing at her shoulder, constricting her chest, a fiery torment that consumed her every thought. She felt herself slipping, the boundaries between reality and hallucination blurring. She saw flashes of the kneaded hearth, the warm glow of the ovens, the comforting scent of yeast and flour. She saw Sister Agnes's gentle smile, heard her soft voice echoing the words, "Give me the strength to do what I can, and the wisdom to know what I cannot." And then, the image of the golden-crusted sourdough, the one she had baked with her last ounce of strength, a tangible prayer, a selfless offering. Meanwhile, unknown to Mia, across town, at the kneaded hearth, a quiet celebration was unfolding. The aroma of the surrender loaf had drawn people in, a comforting beacon in the gathering dusk. Ilara had arranged for it to be delivered, a final gift from Mia to her beloved community. Each slice, offered freely, was shared with a reverence usually reserved for sacraments. Neighbors, friends, even strangers drawn by the unique scent, partook of the bread. There were tears, yes, for the woman who had poured her heart into every loaf, but also a profound sense of gratitude, a quiet hope that transcended the grim news of her deteriorating condition. They ate the bread, and in doing so, they unknowingly upheld Mia, their collective gratitude a silent current, flowing back towards her hospital room. Back in her room, Mia's breathing grew shallower still, punctuated by long, agonizing pauses. The medical team had increased her morphine drip, but the pain, or perhaps something beyond it, still clung to her. Ilara buried her face in Mia's hand, her shoulders shaking. Julian closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his stern face. The beeping of the monitoring equipment seemed to slow, mirroring the slowing rhythm of Mia's heart. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken goodbyes. This was it, they all knew. The end of the artisan's rhythm, the final bitter taste of surrender. The relentless storm of pain had intensified, twisting Mia's body in its merciless grip. Consciousness flickered like a dying candle flame. Brief moments of agonizing clarity punctuated by long stretches of a terrifying, suffocating darkness. She felt herself slipping, a deep primal fear clawing at her, yet paradoxically, a profound exhaustion that yearned for release. The hospital room, once a sterile cage, now seemed to dissolve around her, replaced by a swirling vortex of sensation. The insistent rhythmic beep of monitors, the hushed, urgent whispers of the medical team, Ilara's soft sobs, Julian's rigid silence. She heard the words, or thought she did, filtering through the haze, unresponsive, preparing for the inevitable, comfort care. Then amidst the chaos, a strange quiet descended. It wasn't the quiet of absence, but of profound presence. A warmth began to unfurl, not a feverish heat, but a gentle, pervasive warmth that started in her left scapula, the very epicenter of her torment. It spread slowly, deliberately, a liquid balm seeping into every aching muscle, every protesting bone. The unbearable, searing pain that had been her constant companion began to recede, not abruptly, but like a tide gently pulling back from the shore, leaving behind a profound, almost unbelievable lightness. The crushing weight in her chest eased. Her lungs, moments before fighting for every gasp, now drew in air with a surprising, effortless ease. It was as if 1,000 invisible hands had lifted the leaden cloak that had suffocated her for so long. Ilara, slumped in a chair beside Mia's bed, her face tear-streaked and swollen, felt a subtle shift in the air. The frantic beeping of the monitors seemed to soften, the erratic peaks and valleys on the screens smoothing out into a more rhythmic pattern. She looked up, her eyes bleary, to find Julian, usually so composed, staring intently at the oxygen saturation monitor, his brow furrowed in disbelief. The numbers, which had been stubbornly clinging to dangerously low levels, were steadily climbing. Dr. Chen, who had been discussing palliative sedation with the night nurse, paused, his head cocked, listening to the new rhythm of the monitors. He approached the bed, his movements cautious, almost reverent. He checked Mia's pulse, then her pupils, his expression a mixture of profound bewilderment and scientific curiosity. "Her vitals are stabilizing," he murmured, more to himself than to the family. "The respiratory rate, it's improving, significantly." Over the next few hours, the impossible continued to unfold. Mia's breathing deepened, her color returned from an ashen gray to a faint, healthier hue. Her eyes fluttered open, not with the glazed, distant look of impending death, but with a surprising clarity. She looked at Ilara, then at Julian, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. The deep, guttural cough that had plagued her for weeks was gone. The medical team, initially cautious, then openly bewildered, initiated a flurry of new tests. Dr. Chen, a man of science who prided himself on his logical diagnostics, found his certainties crumbling. The chest X-ray, taken just yesterday, showed extensive lung involvement. What would today's show? The results came back the following morning, defying every medical expectation. The radiologist, a calm, unflappable woman, called Dr. Chen directly. "Dr. Chen, I'm looking at Mia Giordano's scans from this morning, and I'm comparing them to yesterday's. There's a significant difference. The large tumor in her left scapula, it has shrunk substantially, and the lung nodules, they are almost undetectable. I've never seen anything like it. It's as if the cancer is in rapid remission." Dr. Chen walked into Mia's room, a printout of the scans clutched in his hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and professional discombobulation. Ilara and Julian were there, Ilara gently dabbing Mia's forehead with a cool cloth. Mia was propped up slightly, sipping gingerly from a cup of weak tea. "Mia," Dr. Chen began, his voice uncharacteristically hushed. "The scans, they're extraordinary. The tumor has shrunk, Mia, dramatically. The lung involvement is almost completely gone. We have no medical explanation for this, none whatsoever. It appears you're in rapid remission." Mia simply nodded, a quiet understanding in her eyes. There was no wild exultation, no triumphant shout, just a profound, peaceful recognition. She had felt it, that shift, that warmth, that inexplicable lightness. It had been more than just a physical sensation. It had been a surrender, a release, a letting go into something larger than her own limited understanding. She had given her last creative breath, not for herself, but for others. And in that selfless act, something within her, or around her, had shifted. Ilara gasped, tears streaming down her face. But these were tears of profound relief, of joyous disbelief. Julian, for the first time in Ilara's memory, looked utterly undone. His shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand over his face, a raw, unmasked emotion breaking through his carefully constructed facade. He sank into a chair, shaking his head slowly, a single unbidden tear tracing a path down his cheek. Mia, her voice still a little weak but clear, looked at them, then back at Dr. Chen. "Dr. Chen," she said, a faint smile gracing her lips, Do you think I could have a piece of that sourdough? The one I made? I find myself quite hungry." The warmth, starting in her left scapula, spread like a gentle tide, seeping into her aching muscles, soothing the raw nerves, extinguishing the fiery tendrils of pain that had consumed her. It wasn't a sudden, jarring cessation, but a gradual, deliberate retreat, replaced by a sensation of profound lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from her chest. The suffocating pressure eased, and a deep, unbidden breath filled her lungs, pure and effortless. It was a breath she hadn't realized she'd been yearning for, a breath that promised life, not struggle. Mia's eyes fluttered open, the harsh hospital lights no longer an assault, but a soft glow. Ilara, her face streaked with tears, was leaning over her hand clutching Mia's. Julian sat rigidly in a chair beside the bed, his stoic facade cracked, revealing the raw pain beneath. "Mia," Ilara whispered, disbelief warring with desperate hope in her voice. "Mamma Mia, can you hear me?" Mia managed a weak nod. Her throat was dry, but the familiar rasp was gone. She felt lighter, not just physically, but as if the dense fog of despair had finally lifted, revealing a clear, calm sky within her. Dr. Chen, who had been consulting quietly with a nurse near the door, turned sharply at Ilara's cry. He approached the bed, his brow furrowed with a mixture of caution and astonishment. He checked her pulse, listened to her heart and lungs, his movements precise, almost hesitant. The frown on his face deepened, not with concern but with utter bewilderment. "Her vital signs are stabilizing," he murmured, more to himself than to them. "The respiratory rate, it's almost normal. And her oxygen saturation, that's impossible." Over the next few hours, the impossible unfolded. Mia's pain, while not entirely gone, was reduced to a dull throb, a faint echo of the torment that had crippled her. She managed to drink sips of water, then a little broth. The dry cough, which had racked her body, was gone. The medical team, a blend of skeptics and seasoned professionals, was baffled. A flurry of consultations, frantic calls to specialists, and then a new round of scans. Mia, though weak, felt a strange, quiet certainty as they wheeled her away. She knew deep in her bones that something fundamental had shifted. Days later, the results came back. Dr. Chen stood before them, a stack of films and reports in his hand, his expression one of profound, almost reverent disbelief. "Mia," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "The scapular tumor, it has significantly shrunk, by over 70%. And the lung nodules, they are almost undetectable. We've never seen anything like this. Not with Ewing sarcoma, not at this stage. It's a spontaneous, rapid remission." He paused, searching for words. "Scientifically, madam, I have no explanation. What you've experienced, it defies all medical understanding." Ilara burst into tears, this time of overwhelming relief, clutching Mia's hand. Julian, for the first time in Mia's memory, openly wept, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Mia, however, felt a profound, quiet peace. Not elation, but a deep sense of grace. She knew it wasn't spontaneous, not in the way the doctor meant. It was a culmination, a surrender that had blossomed into something beautiful and inexplicable. Her first solid food request, a day later, was not for some bland hospital fare, but for a small piece of her own sourdough, the one she had baked with her last ounce of strength. Ilara, teary-eyed, brought it to her, the dark, crusty loaf a testament to a journey neither of them could have imagined. As Mia tasted the familiar tang, the soft, chewy crumb, she felt a surge of pure, unadulterated life. It was more than just bread. It was a promise. Mia's recovery was steady, defying every medical expectation. She was weak, thin, but the cancerous grip had loosened, then vanished. When she finally walked out of the hospital, leaning on Ilara's arm, the spring air felt crisp and new, each breath a conscious act of gratitude. Julian was waiting, not in a crisp suit, but in a comfortable sweater, a tentative smile on his face. He had come to visit her every day, not just as an obligation, but as if drawn by an invisible thread. Their conversations were no longer stilted or clinical, but flowed easily, often punctuated by comfortable silences. He even brought her books, not about architecture, but about gardening, a shared, forgotten childhood passion. The kneaded hearth stood waiting, gathering dust, a silent monument to her absence. But Mia saw it differently now. It wasn't just a bakery, it was a sanctuary, a place where stories were baked into bread, where community was kneaded into dough. She knew she couldn't go back to the grueling pace she had once maintained, but she didn't want to. Her priorities had shifted profoundly. With Julian's unexpected, eager help, they began renovating. He didn't just suggest architectural changes, he physically worked, sanding floors, painting walls, even helping Mia choose new, softer lighting. He redesigned the counter, adding a lower section for children to reach, and suggested open shelves for recipe books and community notices. "It's more than a bakery, isn't it, Mom?" he'd said one afternoon, covered in sawdust, a genuine smile on his face. "It's a hearth." Mia reopened the Kneaded Hearth, not as a bustling commercial enterprise, but as a community hub. She offered introductory sourdough classes, focusing not just on technique, but on the patience, the surrender to the natural process. She set up a small library corner with books on nutrition, mindfulness, and even a few spiritual texts Sister Agnes had recommended. The aroma of baking bread once again filled the street, but now it carried something more, a quiet hum of resilience, a whisper of grace. She no longer resisted conversations about faith or spirituality. Her own faith was quiet, personal, woven into the rhythm of her days. She didn't preach, didn't declare herself a miracle. Instead, she shared her story, not as a defiant testament to a specific prayer, but as a humble acknowledgement of a profound, inexplicable shift that occurred when she surrendered her own will to something greater, when she poured her last creative breath into an act of selfless giving. It wasn't a prayer for healing, she'd often tell her students, her hands covered in flour, her gaze soft and wise. It was a prayer through creation, an offering of my last strength for others, and perhaps that was the prayer I needed to say all along. Ilara, now a full-time partner in the bakery, often watched Mia, a quiet reverence in her eyes. Mia's transformation was complete. She still baked every day, but each loaf was now a silent prayer, a tangible expression of gratitude, a reminder that even in the darkest night, grace could rise, unexpected and boundless, like a perfectly proofed dough. The Kneaded Hearth wasn't just a bakery, it was a living testament to a new recipe for life, one seasoned with humility, connection, and the transformative power of selfless love.